Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ghana's session at the AFSIC conference. Would like to begin with introductions. Our speakers are Michael Akafia, who is the Vice President and Head of Legal and Compliance, Goldfields, Ghana. And then we have Tariq Mogani, who is the founder of Affinity. We also have Sakib from People's Pensions Trust joining the panel after Michael's presentation. Michael, back to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Sarah Adelaide. Usually you'd have in sessions like this representatives of the governmental agency which is tasked with promotion of investment, and that's how you have all the other summits happening. But I think it's just as well that for the Ghana Summit, we've chosen to have persons who are themselves directly involved in investing and who can give from at least a private and independent perspective what the situation like is Ghana. So you won't hear all the usual fluff and additional things that you hear sometimes, salesman's pitch that you hear from other agencies. So hopefully that should be another kind of perspective. So that's it. And in terms of this presentation, I'll just quickly try and run through the presentation as quickly as possible. Can then spend more time doing the Q&A after, so that the other panel members join me so we can have a discussion. In terms of the outline for the presentation, I'll just do a quick overview just for those of us who are already familiar with Ghana and have a connection to Ghana, just a refresher, and then for insights for those who are curious about Ghana. And we then look at what it is that is Ghana's unique selling proposition as far as investment attractiveness is concerned. We look at the general incentives provided under law, and then just give you guidance regarding how to navigate through sometimes what is referred to as a regulatory maze. And then for me, the key focus of this will be having a discussion on trends relating to traditional opportunities in Ghana, and then for us, more importantly, emerging trends as far as investment, Ghana as an investment destination is concerned. So that will be the approach that we'll take in doing this presentation. So in terms of Ghana itself, of course, you know that the capital is Accra, and you know that we have a population of 30 million people as at the last population and housing census in 2021. And our currency is the Ghana cedi. We'll have a quick chat about the Ghana cedi and how it's doing now, given all the things that are happening now. Ghana's main exports are gold. Traditional exports are gold, cocoa, oil, and gas. But in recent years, there have been attempts to enhance the non-traditional exports, and so we'll touch a bit on that. Of course, in terms of the nature of the economy that we have, we've been operating a liberal democratic system with a market economy as its focus. So because of that, you would see that some of the structures that have existed have reached a certain level of maturity when compared to some of the other countries on the continent, because Ghana subscribed to a big fundamental reforms in the 80s as part of this structural adjustment and economic recovery program. So you see that feed into some of the things that are happening now. And then in terms of what Ghana is famous for, and those things that help us position ourselves as unique and distinct from other African countries, one of the things we are noted for is, of course, we blaze a trail as far as gaining independence from our colonial masters is concerned. And then because of that, there's a certain Pan-African heritage that we always try and take advantage of, which feeds into tourism and other things which we'll touch on. And then, of course, some of the people who are most famous who help to project Ghana's image are some of our famous sportsmen. I'm sure we all know familiar names, and we don't need to belabor that. But of course, the thing about Ghana, which makes Ghana what it is gold, because, of course, it needs no believing the fact that we used to be called the Gold Coast for good reason. And I think one of the things I want to highlight head on is the current situation, because, of course, that's one of the things that we think that people have questions about. Of course, there are headwinds everywhere globally, but Ghana itself going through those challenges, compounded by some of the things in Ghana. The key thing, of course, COVID-19 had its impact on supply chain, its effect on supply chain disruption and the effect on supplies and inflation. Of course, then not long after that, the Russia-Ukraine war has kicked in and has had continued effect on us, just like other countries. And you would see that one of the things that has compounded our situation is the fact that obviously there's been some debt overhang. Debt itself is not a bad thing, as one of my colleagues was pointing out, compatriots was pointing out earlier. It's all about how you use it and so on, but sometimes it has its own effects and so on. So that's it. In terms of the current situation, there's been a big jump in depreciation of the cedi. You see headlines that says that it's either the second worst performing currency or the first worst performing currency. Of course, in Africa, in terms of, Bloomberg, which has been tracking this and tracking this other currencies, at least in terms of convertible currencies. We've been going through a period of high persistent inflation, currently at 3.9%, and still there's a sense that it may peak soon and begin to decline thereafter. But the central bank has been doing what it has to do in sort of tightening the monetary space to try and improve the situation. One of the things we've had to go through is all these credit ratings downgrades. Moody's, Fitch have all done their downgrades. What that has meant is that clearly foreign portfolio investors have had to sell their bonds. The way it works is that for some of them, they have guidelines that require that once credit ratings agencies rate you at a certain grade, they must pull out of your market necessarily. So that's one of the things feeding into the depreciation of the currencies, because these foreign investors, portfolio investors, have had to convert their, cash out, divest themselves from the bonds that they had purchased and other investments. And then that has been putting pressure, shipping out Forex, and that has been putting pressure on our Ghana cedi. And so one of the things, though, is that in a market economy like ours, what this means is that whereas it may be a bad case looking at the macro indicators and looking at our situation, it also presents opportunities. And so that's one of the things we'll touch on. But one of the silver linings is the idea that we've signed up, we are looking to sign up to an IMF program. The expectation is that that will help lead to policy credibility. We are hoping that, obviously, that will signal to investors that we've taken a prudent outlook on things. And so because of that, there's a turnaround expected. One of the things we must clear, the hurdles we must clear before we can sign off the IMF program, is currently what is under discussions under the debt sustainability assessments, because that's what will determine whether or not, how quickly we can sign up to the IMF program and begin to see a turnaround. But in the midst of all of these things, one of the things that is also a reality is that this also presents opportunities. For some who are interested in buying assets, it's meant that assets have been at their cheapest in terms of that. Like, for instance, for those cashing out of the bond market, what it presents for fund managers and pension funds is that they may be able to pick up some of these bonds that are being divested at relatively cheaper prices now, in expectation for the future. One of the things that has been said is that in periods like this, those who are keen and looking for hot investments may leave your jurisdiction, but the expectation is obviously it means that you attract more sustainable investors and those who have a long-term commitment to your economy. I mean, we're just discussing in terms of the currency depreciation, all other things being equal, it means that our exports will become cheaper. And so what it means is that those businesses that are in a position to increase, scale up, to take advantage of the impact of the currency on the cost of those export products, they'll be able to take advantage of that. So that in terms of why the unique selling proposition, I will not bore you too much with the details of it, but to point out that, of course, Ghana has been a stable, democratic country, for the longest while now, 3 decades and counting. And one of the key things about ours is that, unlike other countries, we've had successful alternation of power between parties. And in fact, there's quite a rule of thumb around in Ghana, conventional wisdom, that no party stays more than 8 years. So that's been the tradition that's building up since 1992. But of course, the current ruling party is hoping to break that thing. But that shows that we've been alternating power without any issues, smooth transitions between the major political parties. Of course, all of the other things that you need in a liberal democratic country, we have inherently. We have a right to information law, which allows for transparency in governance and all of that. That's why we are doing very well. As for our peace, the peaceful nature of the country, that's one of the things that stands us out on the African continent. And as for our resources, and that's the kind of area that I happen to be in, gold, be number 1 producer in gold in Africa for the time being, because South Africa experienced some decline. The second largest cocoa producer, we are looking to add more value going forward. The third largest bauxite reserve, that's one of the things that's looking like will present an opportunity for investors, because we've been looking for the longest while in having an integrated industry which ties the bauxite and works through the entire value chain to the products that, and you see steps that have been taken by the government in the subsequent slides in doing that. One of the other things that is interesting about our resource situation is that lithium has been discovered, and there's a current prospect in developing a lithium business, and I'm sure I don't need to harp on the fact that this is linked to the whole idea of energy transition and use of electronic vehicles, subsequently. And so Ghana is positioning itself to be able to take advantage of that. As for doing business in Ghana, I mean, for the longest while, because we've had a stable democracy, government after government have made it their core business to try and decrease the cost of doing business and also improve the turnaround time for establishing businesses in Ghana. So you see all these indicators which show that we're doing very, very well on the African continent as far as doing business is concerned. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay. So the other thing about Ghana is our unique position on the globe. I mean, as we say, we are the center of the world because we are near the equator and also on longitude 0, the Greenwich meridian. So in terms of access, very accessible from anywhere in the world at short distance. And in terms of that geography itself, it helps us in terms of our weather, and you see how it supports various industries as we go, as I touch on other emerging areas in Ghana in terms of investment opportunities. And as for the people, our skills is quite renowned in terms of supplying human resources for the continent. In terms of the legal profession, which I happen to belong to, we've produced former Chief Justice of Kenya, former Chief Justice of Seychelles, former Chief Justice of Gambia, and so on. So we're able to export capacity onto the continent because people happen to be highly skilled. Wage rates is one of the things that we compete very favorably in, because you would see that people are competitively paid. And for the investor, what that means is that you would find relatively cheap labor in Ghana, highly skilled but relatively cheap labor. So that's one of the things that we have as an advantage. But then, of course, there's been much talk about the burgeoning middle class. And Ghana is one example where this manifests. So you see that translate into the real estate sector and the reason why it's still booming even in difficult times and so on. And as for the people and their hospitality, those who visited can attest to that. And we don't need to belabor that one. I mean, you see all kinds of indices that show that we do very well in that. One of the things that makes us attractive in the sub-region is that, of course, we have the second biggest economy. And as you would see from some of the other studies, eighth biggest economy in Africa, and still growing at that. So rapidly expanding infrastructure. One of the things that has happened is that government has set up the Ghana Infrastructure Fund, which is supposed to be a dedicated fund helping to bridge the financing gap as far as infrastructure development is concerned. So that itself presents opportunities. You would find that even gold mining companies like us look to invest in infrastructure because we see how that ties back into our core business and so on and so forth. So that happens quite a bit. And in terms of the current development in trade finance, Ghana was keen in ensuring that we hosted the Africa Continental Free Trade Area after the Secretariat, Ghana hosts the Secretariat. And so that means that we've been doing everything we can to position ourselves to take advantage on the opportunities that it presents. Now, the key thing about our investment legal regime is the incentives provided for in the law. We blazed the trail in that regard, and you see that we passed the earlier investment law before this one was in 1985 and set the scene for us to be able to attract FDI into Ghana, and then other African countries followed. And then so subsequently, we realized that we had to play catch-up again after a while because other African countries had come to learn of some of the good things in our law and had sort of adopted them. And so there was a new law subsequently passed in 1994, which sort of allows for all of these incentives, including free transferability of forex. Because we know that neighbors of ours where that is such a challenge, currently. But we allow that freely. And so it's mainly to meet some of these needs that investors usually would have. Payment of dividends, payment of foreign loans that they've contracted, which are relatively cheaper, meeting fees and charges associated with those investments. And then at the end of the investment, they're allowed to freely transfer their capital in forex without any restrictions once they go through the process that is laid down. And of course, there's a guarantee against expropriation. That is actually a constitutional guarantee. So what that means is that it's set in stone and cannot be, and you'll find various other aspects of it which ensure that there's no nationalism, especially also in the resource sector, because that's one of the things that resource investors are conscious about. Then there are specific special incentives that the law provides for, where for strategic reasons the government may choose to enter into an agreement with various investors and provide specific incentives to make it worth their while for them to carry out investment in areas that have been indicated. Of course, the law also provides that there are incentives provided for location of industries in various places to give, especially for areas that are now developing, so that the incentives are meant to make up for some of the shortfalls in infrastructure and services in those areas. And ADR, alternative dispute resolution, is one of the mechanisms provided for in the law to give confidence to investors that in the unlikely event that there's any dispute between themselves and Ghana as a state or any other party in Ghana, they have recourse to universally acknowledged fair principles for resolution of disputes. Now, this part I will not spend too much time on because we can tackle it as and when questions require us to do so. But this has to do with the regulatory regime as regarding, what you need to be able to set up a business. So, in terms of turnaround time, a business can be set up in a day if it's an emergency, but the average time right now it will be like 3 days, but 5 days in the worst case scenario. So that is that. And so you can see from some of the fees that it's relatively cost effective. The only area to touch on is that when it comes to certain investments, the law itself prescribes certain minimum capital for joint ventures and then for wholly owned foreign enterprises. And as of now, it's $200,000 for joint ventures and then $500,000 for wholly owned enterprises. Now, for trading, and as in retail trading, it's quite a restricted area, and that's why with that, the expectation is that for a foreign investor, they have a minimum capital of $1 million and at least employ not less than 20 Ghanaians. I think that the other procedure we can go into if there are questions along those lines, but I think I will not, in the interest of time, I'll not bore you with the details of the procedure related to that. But essentially, the two distinctions is that where the foreign investor is investing cash, the procedure set out is distinct from when they are investing consideration, a non-cash consideration or capital other than cash. So that's what this part deals with. And as for the incentives tied to expatriate quota, it's quite well spelled out. There's a graduated scale for determining the number of expatriates you can engage automatically. This is the automatic expatriate quota. What that means is that there's room to engage even more expatriate if need be, based on justification. And so, of course, we have the free zones. We're one of the first countries in Africa to set up a free zones enclave and allow for single entity free zone entities to operate. And so we've had a free zone area just outside the industrial town of Tema. And so there are a number of businesses operating there. The key requirement there is that they must export at least 70% of what they produce. And of course, the incentives are quite well spelled out. They are regarded as different, being in a different jurisdiction as far as the customs territory is concerned. So they're insulated from import taxes, from all the taxes associated with that. And they're exempted from corporate income tax during the period, first 10 years of operation, and then at 8% subsequently. This compares with a corporate income tax for non-free zones entity of 25%. I mean, for those in the resource area, oil and gas and mining is 35% of income. And all of the other exemptions apply. And some of the incentives are not too dissimilar to the ones that we've looked at in the previous laws. And this is a procedure for applying. And so in terms of traditional opportunities, this is where, I think that, best spending some time, and more importantly, also the emerging trends. As far as traditional opportunities are concerned, mining is one of the key areas. It's not called, its former name is not Gold Coast for nothing. And so you find that gold is our biggest export, biggest value in export. And so you would find that as a way of realizing more value from our resource, government has set up the Minerals Income and Investment Fund. And it's set up such as to partner foreign investors, if need be, and so on, and then to try and maximize the value from our gold resources. What MIF, the Minerals Income and Investment Fund, has now done is to partner. In fact, Ghana's most recent gold mining company set up has investment from the Minerals Income and Investment Fund. And one of the areas they're looking to focus on is the non-traditional resource areas, like the lithium and the other areas that I spoke about earlier. I mean, one of the things they've been seeking to do is to set up some kind of royalty company to harness the proceeds from royalty proceeds from mining companies to leverage on that for whatever advantage, securitize and so on. So those are the kinds of things they'll be looking at. In terms of adding value to the resource, government has been in furtherance of the rhetoric of adding value to gold, has sort of through its precious minerals marketing companies, wholly owned wholly owned state entity, but it's entered into a JV with to set up a refinery called Royal Gold as a way of adding value. So those are some of the things happening. Local content is one of the things. Obviously, foreign investors have had concerns about local content because of what it's meant to achieve. But one of the things that can indicate is that there's some flexibility in the law such that you would have a rule, a general rule which says this is reserved for citizens, but then it is not an absolute rule. What the law allows for is for various Ghanaian entities to partner foreign investors if need be as a way of building capacity, especially in areas where the capacity is wanting. So there's still opportunity in spite of the fact that local content is now the rage, in Ghana. Now, I mentioned the idea of trying to set up the integrated aluminium industry. And as a result of that, the state has invested in an institution called the Ghana Integrated Aluminium Development Corporation, which is meant to lead the effort to improve to ensure that we have the entire value chain present in the bauxite development and so on. Same has been attempted in the area of steel. So that is what is happening currently. Now, in terms of the agribusiness area, it's still a traditional area, but the current trend is to move away from the cash crops that we've always had to move towards tree crops. So a tree crops development authority has been set up to do just that. One of the interesting things we see happening is that we've found Ghanaians partnering foreign investors to set up greenhouses, and two examples are cited here. One called AgriTop, which has been setting up greenhouses like the one you see in the picture next to it, next to on the right-hand side of the slide, and then Dizenhof. So that's one area that's presenting an opportunity. What that means is that it allows for a focused sort of attention on improving crop yield and ensuring that at least we are as competitive as we can be for all the things produced, as competitive as you would find anywhere in the world, so that we can compete favorably. In the financial sector, one of the exciting things happening is in the pensions area. It's the pension fund industry, assets under management has been growing exponentially over time. This clearly was a deliberate, and with that, I think when the time is up, Sakib will help me address some of the questions related to the pensions industry. And so that is feeding into almost all of the other areas, because pension funds are now under guidelines required to dedicate some of their funds to alternative investments and so on. In terms of the other areas, of course, banking sector, there were reforms recently to try and improve the resilience of the industry. We've been currently carrying out stress asset quality tests and so on, and stress tests to make sure that they're resilient enough to face up to the headwinds that we're experiencing and so on. As for insurance, a new insurance act was passed to try and improve insurance penetration, introduce areas which, compulsory insurance was one of the things that was deemed as a way of improving insurance penetration. So commercial buildings, you are required to insure against compulsorily, and then professional indemnity. In terms of the emerging opportunities, of course, we talked about AFTA. And in addition to hosting the secretariat, you would find that the country itself has been keen to position itself to take advantage of it. So the supporting infrastructure is being put in place. With that, my compatriot, the CEO of the Exim Guarantee, may help us address issues related to trade finance and how we can we are positioning ourselves to take advantage of the AFTA regime and so on. There's capacity development happening. Now, a new public-private partnership law was passed to try and enhance development in that area. We've had all kinds of private-public partnerships in various areas in developing infrastructure. The Accra-Tema motorway is one of the ones on the cards now. And the attempt is to have private sector develop it and toll it under a build, operate, and transfer, or build, operate, own, and transfer, all kinds of regimes. That's what was used to expand the port at Tema and currently happening at Takoradi. So it's happening now under a legal regime which has been well established. Now, the other exciting area, which I'm sure my friend Tariq will help us address, is the issue of tech and innovation. And that's where you find that private sector entities are seeking to take advantage of government's digitalization drive, where the whole idea is to automate all of the interfaces between public sector service providers and the public. And so you find that that's where young businessmen and innovators are taking advantage. Some of them are SMEs and taking advantage of the platform provided by business incubators to develop apps and develop all kinds of things that sort of meet that government digitalization drive. And of course, related to that is the whole information security and cybersecurity space, which is also, as we develop and automate and use computers, you find that presents opportunities for investment in, and then related area of privacy and data protection. Now, of course, we've been talking about mobile technology. We know that the Kenyans led the way with the M-Pesa, but Ghana has since almost caught on in terms of the looking at the value of the float. At the last check, I think it was about $4 billion and growing exponentially in terms of the float on mobile money alone. And so you find things happening. One of the key exciting things for me personally is the approach adopted by our central bank, Bank of Ghana, in trying to improve this particular area. One of the kind of exciting things happening is that they are operating, they've introduced what they're calling the regulatory sandbox, which is, in spite of existing regulation, is allowing companies to innovate in their space and to try things in spite of regulation in order to be able to improve. I think with this is actually the last slide, actually. So with this, we can bring the presentation to a close and then focus more on the Q&As that will come that my panel members, co-panel members would help me address. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So we are moving things slightly different a bit. We invite one of the panelists, Tariq, to talk to us a bit about what his company, Affinity, has done in terms of building or driving the fintech system in Ghana. So he's going to share with us the success story of Affinity. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Michael, as well, too, for the introduction. So my name is Tariq. I'm the founder of Affinity. It's the first digital bank in Ghana and the first fully fledged digital bank in sub-Saharan Africa. And we were very glad and very proud to have announced that we got our banking license in March. It's the first license grant of its kind in 9 years in Ghana as well, too. So it's a journey that I've been on for the last 6 years, so things don't happen overnight, as everyone knows. It's a very difficult environment, and it takes a lot of resilience and tenacity. But I wanted to share with you my story and our journey. And before anyone asks any questions, I'm actually Ghanaian. I was born and raised in Ghana. I'm fourth generation Ghanaian. I was born in Kumasi, moved to the UK when I was 12, and moved back about 10 years ago to start this journey. I'll give you a bit about my background and my history and why this journey that I'm on means so much to me and why I've been very, very lucky enough to have dragged a lot of people along on the way as well, too. So I was born in a town called Kumasi, about 4 hours from Accra, to a Lebanese heritage family, big industrialists, and a family of entrepreneurs. And I was born to and raised to believe that I was an entrepreneur, that, you know, if you put your mind to it and you rolled up your sleeves, you could actually get everything done. And of course, that's something that I grew up with on a daily basis, and it's something which a lot of Ghanaians grow up with on a daily basis, because it is a country of about 80% entrepreneurs. So when you sit in traffic and someone's trying to sell a toothbrush to you on the side of the road, that person's an entrepreneur. They may not be doing a Series A, but I can tell you that person is an entrepreneur, okay? So I moved to the UK when I was 12 years old. I studied here in the UK. I did my undergrad at Imperial and did a PhD at Cambridge. and decided to move back to Ghana after about 10 years. I focused on investment. I come from an investment management background. I worked for a hedge fund here in the UK, and I had a specialty in financial services, investing in banks. I woke up one day, thought that I wasn't happy in my life. I felt like I needed a purpose. I needed a reason to get out of bed every single day, and I felt I needed to do something that was impactful. And I quit my job. Everyone thought I was crazy. Moved back to Ghana to live at home with my parents. Not a good look when you're in your 40s, but hey-ho. And decided to basically set up my business with a big focus on banking and banking the unbanked. So I'll tell you some fun facts about Ghana, but it's also a trend that exists in all of sub-Saharan Africa. Only 42% of Ghanaians have a bank account, and less than 8% have access to credit. It's a huge issue when it comes to building SMEs. I know Michael touched on that earlier on as well, too. I spent 6 months when I moved back to Ghana doing the most random things. I was a beekeeper, I worked in affordable housing, I worked in microfinance, I worked in the most ICT, I worked for a tech incubator. I did everything I could get my hands on just to try and understand the plight of entrepreneurs and what they needed basically to grow. Because SMEs and individuals that create those SMEs are the drivers of social and economic growth. So maybe out of naivety and a bit of stupidity, I decided that I wanted to start a bank. And I started on that journey about 6 years ago. First by acquiring a small microfinance business in Ghana and playing around with it. And what I found was pretty amazing. So ahead of getting our license grant, we spent a few years developing tech, and if anyone wants a demo, I'll show it to you later, developing the tech basically to actually attract these customers. What we realized was that these customers were unregistered, mostly unbanked, mostly from the informal sector, and as a result, they struggled to go to a bank. I don't know if any of you guys have opened a bank account in Ghana before, but it takes weeks. You know, you need to be registered, you need back then a TIN number, you know, it's quite a difficult process to go through. So that person, when you're driving through on the side of the road that's trying to sell you a toothbrush, imagine how difficult it is for them to basically open a bank account. So we used technology as a way of leapfrogging this and actually building a platform that did automatic KYC and anti-money laundering checks and identity checks as well too, to enable to attract and maintain customers onto our platform and to provide them with affordable financial services as well too. So we have two digital channels. One is an online digital channel, so for most of us in here, 10% of the population, download the app, open an account. You can open an account in under 5 minutes, which is a big deal in Ghana. The second is an agency platform that we built. And so you'll hear the stories. Everyone has a mobile phone in Ghana, but I can tell you not everyone can afford data in Ghana. You know, we all have people that we work with that switch on their data for half an hour a day. We all have a smartphone, but data is 10 times the price in sub-Saharan Africa than it is in Europe. And I can tell you this, it's not gonna come as a surprise, I hope. We don't earn 10 times the amount of money that Europeans do. So what we end up doing as well too is building a channel for offline users. So it's a digital channel. We have a proprietary network of agents. We built our branches, we're branchless, but we have makeshift branches using shipping containers. It's all, I wish I should have brought my presentation along with me. It's all automated, so it's all using Internet of Things, all very smart. They're eco, they're upcycled, they're shipping containers with bidirectional toilets driven by battery, pretty cool. And we're rolling them out in Ghana over the next 3 years. It's been an amazing journey. We have over 10,000 customers and we haven't technically launched yet. It's just by word of mouth within 1 kilometer radius from where we are. 62% are women and 86% did not have a bank account until we came along as well too. We've disbursed about $9 million worth of loans over the last 2.5 years, 6 million over the period of COVID with a loss rate of only 4%. So it's been an absolutely wonderful journey and we've mobilized $30 million worth of deposits. And that's before we launch. So 2 things. Love to tell you more about what we do and why I'm so hopeful about not just Ghana, but sub-Saharan Africa in general as well too. And maybe give you a demo later on. I'll be around for the rest of the day. But anyway, I'll hand it back to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq. We'll now invite Sakib Nazir to talk to us about to touch on the financing opportunities and challenges for Ghana's informal sector.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you. The informal sector in emerging markets presents an amazing opportunity. In Ghana, and this is statistics that you can extrapolate across emerging markets, the population is around 33 million people. And if you took a working age of about half, that's about 15, 16 million people, out of which only 1.5 million people are formally employed. So this leaves a huge segment of 14, 15 million people out there who are not unemployed, but who are either underemployed or informally employed. The other nice statistic is that almost all of this adult population today has a mobile wallet, which means they are now visible. And maybe the last statistic I will leave you with is that the total value of mobile money transactions in Ghana last year was in excess of $100 billion. So that's almost double the GDP of $60 billion. So this, what mobile money, what technology has done, has made very visible the strong economic value of this informal economy. And there's now a huge push to bring financial services as a start. Starting with banking, with what Tariq is doing. There's a big push for insurance. We are working on pensions for the informal sector. And then lending, whether it's unsecured lending on small regular amounts to larger tickets, which are secured against some asset or the other. And there are companies like PEG Ghana, which was recently acquired by B-Box, which is providing solar panels on lease. There's now a big push to finance for drivers who are driving Ubers, right, to help them purchase and own cars on a long-term lease basis. So it does require a lot of innovation and technology, but that is where Ghana, despite the current challenges that we're going through, has been able to put together, a very strong ecosystem led by the telcos, led by the central bank, which has the new Office of Innovation and Financial Services. And these fundamentals will remain strong and will continue to grow and hopefully then be rolled out across other emerging markets. I'll keep my presentation short to this point, and I'm happy then to join in on answering any questions that may be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakib. We now invite questions from the audience. Any questions for the panel? Right.
Does it work? Yeah. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on this? Are there any first PPP marquee projects? How does it work? Who is custodian of that? I understand that the Ministry of Finance was supposed to set up actually the commission that would evaluate these projects. Has this been done? Not yet? Is it in the process? If you can elaborate on that.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. I mean, I pointed out that the law had been passed. But even prior to the passage of the law, a PPP policy was sort of issued, which was supposed to set the framework, the scene for guiding those who are going to enter into that. And in terms of projects, which prospective projects, I mentioned the Accra-Tema motorways is one of the one of the best highways in Ghana, and the expectation is that because it's already tolled, it already set up on a scheme that allowed for it to pay for itself, and it's paid for itself several times over. So it's already attractive to investors. At some point, they had a short list of 4 investors who were keen to operate it. The Tema Harbour is one such expansion, which was expanded on the base of build, operate, and transfer, even ahead of the passage of the law. What the law has done is to set out with certainty the various steps to carry this through, including the bureaucratic office that you mentioned that the Ministry of Finance was supposed to. And so those things are currently in the works and will be done. And it's not slowing down the projects which have been lined up to be sort of done under the wings of a PPP arrangement. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. The question is for Tariq. You mentioned that it took you 6 years to get to where you are now. What were the stumbling blocks? Were they regulatory? And I mean, if another company wants to do the same thing, how can they replicate and, I mean, at least squeeze that time, I mean, and not another 6 years? Yeah.
So there were a couple of, there are huge barriers to entry when it comes to financial services, and I'm sure Sakib can also talk a bit about that. You need to be licensed, and you know that we've heard the news across the continent of a lot of fintechs playing around, being a bit naughty against the regulator as well too. So we did things, as my investors say, the hard way, but the right way. And it took us a while, basically, to get through with all the regulatory approvals and to make sure that we have aligned our interests with the regulator as well too. And the one thing I wanted to say is I've heard comments over and over again about Ghana being a very conservatively regulated environment. I disagree with that. I want to say the one thing that's great about our regulator is that it's very clear what you can and cannot do, and that provides certainty for businesses, because there hasn't been any surprise over the last few years of new legislation that comes through that changes anything to do with our strategy. It's been very, very clear. It just took a while to just make sure you go through the hurdles and the requirements. So we got a provisional license last June, and we got given a list of things that we had to meet in order to get the final license, including information security work, penetrative testing, internal controls setup, risk setup, etc. We had to go through that checklist and set everything up. And then there was an inspection that came in and reports that were provided, and we got the final license on the back of that. So they're going about it the right way, but unfortunately that just takes time.
I think there was a point when there was a lot of unregulated activities, you know, so even the work that the telcos were doing with mobile money was not regulated. It did not fall under the purview of the central bank until the passage of the laws in 2019, I think it was, or early 2020. Since then, everything has become a lot more structured. There's now a big fintech focus within both the central bank and the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is really making it very easy. I would think today, and I'm involved in some of this work, I don't think it would take you more than 9 months to 1 year to get any license once you have. So it's easier for people if you want to be, you know, in the past had been gray about it and had gone in to start operating and then got an approval letter. But now, with the laws in place, it's much faster, and the officers involved are very cordial in getting the licenses in place.
Can I just add to that? There are two different regulators. So the one that Steve is talking about is I'm on the banking supervision side, and that's a separate regulator, basically. And that takes a very long time, just to be very clear. And I think actually they're even closed for business from last I heard, by the way. Thank you.
We've got one question here.
Oh, sure.
We just got
Hi.
one over here quickly, and then we'll go there.
Oh, no.
Digital bank.
Sure.
I mean, it's very interesting that this will actually serve the informal sector,
Yeah.
the underbanked and the unbanked,
Yeah.
presumably. Now, my question is, what is your strategy for onboarding the women, perhaps some of these women farmers in the rural areas? I mean, and generally, people in the rural areas, what's the strategy for onboarding them? I'm not quite sure if many of them have smartphones, because in Ghana, I know that quite a few people still use analog phones. So I'm curious to find out how you're going about
Sure.
onboarding them.
And it's a very smart point that you make, because I'm not a fan of when people compare businesses on our continent to businesses that exist in Europe, right? You know, like you are the Amazon of Africa or the Monzo of Africa. If you cut and paste a business like that on our continent, you're killing off 90% of the population. And so what the work that Sakib is doing, the work that I'm doing as well too, is trying to focus on the mass market and the majority of the population. And a huge part of that is offline digital channels. It may seem like a bit of a contradiction, but I don't know if you've ever used a USSD app before. You know, when you do a short code start, that's a digital channel that's technically offline. So we have an agency network. So we have 26 agents at the moment. We're rolling out over the next 18 months to have 60 agent points. All our customers, majority of them have come through those agency networks. So we built a tech platform, including an agency app and back office app. You can rapidly onboard a customer in under 5 minutes, and then they use your feature phone to interact using USSD to make transactions afterwards as well too. And that's why we're able to have 86% of our customer being previously unbanked. I don't know if you want to touch on how you...
Again, a bit late, but maybe never too late. The government is working hard now to roll out a national ID project, which has almost registered everybody in the country. So one ID which you can quickly verify, with biometrics is very important for onboarding anybody in the country. Then there's also a SIM card registration process, also to link everyone's phone to ID. So that takes away a lot of the pain that we all face with KYC and AML. And then, of course, as much as there is today in a lot of areas 4G, funny enough, at least along the main roads and the main cities, there is nationwide coverage. Almost everybody has a mobile phone. Yes, it may not be, I think the last data I saw was about 50% smartphone capacity, but data is still expensive and people use smartphones as dumb phones. But it will only continue to get better. As we realize that as people are getting younger and younger, they are becoming more and more smartphone oriented and more utilizing data. And so the statistics around who is on social media, who is using the internet, they're only increasing. So this is the time to come in, understand the reality on the ground, and build for the future.
I think we're going to need to call it there. Thank you. But you guys can carry on asking questions outside, and this is going to become the Nigeria Investment Summit now. Thank you.